Welcome to the Fun Astrology and Merriman Market Analyst weekly financial podcast. I'm Thomas Miller. We're going to be reading the free weekly column that is published every Friday evening on MMAcycles.com by Ray Merriman, who has been doing this for over 50 years. And as you'll hear in the newsletter here in a little bit, we may be getting ready to navigate some waters where that 50 years might just come in handy. Ray shares some very good astrology and personal analysis and thoughts in the second half of this newsletter. But first, let's review the markets of the week past. First article is from the Wall Street Journal Online from Friday. The U.S. job growth burst past expectations last month, while the unemployment rate edged up to 4%, presenting a mixed view of a labor market that has generally been cooling without overly troubling most workers. Total non-farm U.S. jobs increased a seasonally adjusted 272,000 jobs in May, more than in April, and well above the 190,000 that economists had expected. And another article from the Wall Street Journal Online on June 7th, this one entitled, "Why the Recession Still Is Not Here." Fed officials are set to hold interest rates steady at their two-day meeting next week. Central banks in Canada and Europe began cutting rates this past week, but growth has been stronger in the U.S. The Fed is trying to balance the risk of cutting too soon and allowing stubborn inflation to persist with the hazard of keeping rates too high and triggering a slowdown that may not be needed to finish their inflation fight. Now, Ray's market commentary for this week, he says the U.S. jobs report came out Friday and it was much bigger than expected. On the same day, gold and silver started out making new weekly highs, but then suddenly reversed and suffered huge losses into the close. From high to low, gold had a range of over $100 and silver nearly $2.50. That is huge. Bitcoin also sold off after posting a weekly high early in the day. In stock indices, it was a mixed bag throughout the world. In Asia and the Pacific Rim, Jupiter, of exaggeration, and Gemini, of wild price volatility, was in full swing in India as elections took place. On Monday, June 3rd, the Nifty index made a new all-time high. The next day, it dropped over 2,000 points from that high. By Friday, it was testing the all-time high again. China's SSE composite fell all week, continuing its downtrend since its 8-month high on May 20th. Other markets of the region experienced modest rallies following their recent lows of May 30th. In Europe, the Netherlands AEX continued its relentless march to new all-time highs right at the end of the week. The Zurich SMI was also explosive, soaring to a new 2-year high. But it was far less exciting in London and Frankfurt, where the stock markets were range-bound and slightly below their all-time highs of last month. In the U.S., both the S&P and NASDAQ made new all-time highs on Friday, but the Dow Jones Industrial Average did not, for a continuing case of intermarket bearish divergence. However, even though each index also made weekly highs on Friday, each also closed lower on the day for a key reversal down signal. This follows Thursday's new moon in Gemini, an air sign, which has a slight historical bias for highs. Could this be the sound of the gong signaling a reversal down? It's always possible this late into a 4-year cycle whose bottom is due by November, but still far away, price-wise, from a confirmation. Yet, keep in mind that Jupiter in Gemini is a 1-year period that can coincide with long-term cycle highs and lows. Gemini likes it both ways. And now, the short-term Geocosmics. This section begins with a quote from Robert Kennedy Jr., a post that was on X, formerly Twitter, on June 5th. He says, "MDMA treatment for PTSD and other mental illnesses has a big drawback. A single treatment is effective. That means small profit potential compared to lifetime treatment with conventional pharmaceuticals. Maybe that's why an FDA advisory committee shot it down. One of the committee members actually works for Johnson & Johnson." End quote. Now Ray's comments, he says, the purpose of this column is to educate readers and listeners to the correspondence of cosmic activity to financial markets behavior, and sometimes political and personal behavior. So let me share some lessons that I've learned from my personal experience, both as a trader and an analyst over the past few decades. I don't know about other financial astrologers, but I find the most exciting, yet challenging, sun sign periods for trading are Gemini and Aquarius. These are almost as challenging, but less exciting as Mercury retrograde, the trickster, or the times nearby to hard transiting aspects involving Uranus. Actually, trading under Uranus aspects can be exciting too, but hard to predict whether it will coincide with a reversal or a breakout to new yearly highs or lows. In the case of the Sun in Gemini, from May 20th to June 20th of this year, or Aquarius, the challenge involves anticipating huge price swings overnight. This is probably exaggerated at this time because Jupiter of exaggeration is also transiting Gemini from May 25th, 2024 through June 9th, 2025. For instance, a big decline may have been anticipated in gold and silver based on cycle studies and solar-lunar combinations between last week and this coming week. But to see gold making its weekly high of 2406 at 1 a.m. Friday morning Eastern Time, and then plunge to 2350 at 7 a.m., well before the payroll report came out, would have been a hard call to trade. Or in the case of silver, the weekly high of $31.67 came at 12:45 a.m. Eastern. By 7 a.m., it was already $1.30 lower, and after the payroll reports, silver fell another $1. Big moves are typical with the Sun and Jupiter in the dualistic sign of Gemini, not to mention Mercury and Venus there also. I'm not sure why the air signs of Gemini and Aquarius should have such sudden and large reversals, but it is something I have observed through the years and I've learned to respect in regard to my own trading strategies. These huge price swings are great for swing trading if you're on the right side. And according to the new MMA Solar Lunar Forecasting app, we could see another coming up this week as the Sun and Mercury square Saturn, June 9th and 12th. And that is surrounding Mars square Pluto in early Taurus and Aquarius, June 11th. This later aspect also implies danger related to either natural calamities or warlike initiatives within 1 week. With so many planets in Gemini, and with Gemini an air sign associated with strong winds, it's also not surprising that there have been a rash of destructive tornadoes, air signs, ravishing the grain belt of the United States, which in turn caused a sudden rise in grain prices. With Mars square Pluto, it's also noteworthy that Russia is reportedly sending naval ships for military exercises in the Caribbean, Cuba, likely in retaliation for the U.S. allowing Ukraine to engage in a level playing field with its war in Russia. The Great Bear is upset that Ukraine can now be allowed to take the offensive against military installations inside Russia that are used to attack Ukraine, whereas over the past 2 years Russia could fire missiles into Ukraine without return fire. Ukraine has been forced to fight the war only from a defensive position, parentheses Biden's rules, while only Russia could take the offensive. It's kind of like playing football, where only one team is allowed to play offense. The other team has to win, but it's never allowed to get the ball, parentheses Putin's rules. It's not going to get easier with Saturn in orb of forming a T-square with the United States natal Mars and Neptune square. So what is all this Gemini energy good for? Well, advances in technology and AI. It brings a lot of new ideas, maybe an overload of too many ideas all at once that are hard to prioritize. But with Saturn, of government and restrictions, in Pisces, and square to these Gemini planets, the pace of advances in technology may be slowed down due to fears or realities of new regulations. That is, innovations are exploding in these fields, but their application may be restricted and or delayed while government officials figure out the pros and cons. These delays and regulations, expected over the next 3 months, may grind the euphoria in these stock sectors to a halt. That's what could happen when Jupiter transitions from favorable aspects to Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, March and June of 2024, to a hard 3-passage series of squares to Saturn from August 2024 through June of 2025. Global governments may act heavy-handed during this transit. It's going to be like going from drugs of pleasure to those of addiction, overseen by Big Pharma in cahoots with big government. Or for most of us, going from a diet of fruit to potatoes. And that concludes this week's newsletter. And by the way, there are some really good announcements and events coming up. So if you'd like to check those out, including more information on that app that was mentioned, go to the newsletter at MMAcycles.com. The free newsletter tab or link is up at the top, and you can check those announcements out for yourself. Big conference coming up in the summer in Europe that sounds really, really cool. So you might want to check that out. All right, have a good rest of the weekend. Kristen and Danny are going to be doing Level Up on Sunday night. I'll be back on Monday. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.